You are strapped into the cockpit of a Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber. Below you, 5,000 feet down, is an enemy airfield. Your orders are simple. Dive at 80 degrees. Release your bomb at 1,500 feet. Pull up before you hit the ground. The automatic system will help you. The dive brakes will keep you from going too fast. The autopilot will pull you out if you black out from the G-forces. You have done this dozens of times in training. You know the procedure by heart. But there is one thing they did not tell you in training. One critical detail your instructors left out. When you enter that dive, you become the slowest, most predictable target in the sky. You cannot maneuver. You cannot take evasive action. You are locked into a straight line, descending at a constant speed for 6 to 8 seconds, and every enemy fighter pilot within 5 miles knows exactly where you are going to be. They can see you coming. They can calculate your trajectory. They can position themselves to intercept. And when they do, there is nothing you can do. You just have to sit there and hope their bullets miss. This is why Stuka pilots in contested airspace had a life expectancy measured in days, not months. This is why, during the Battle of Britain in August 1940, Germany lost 20% of its entire Stuka force in just 10 days. This is why Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, withdrew the Stuka from the battle on August 18th and never again deployed it in large numbers against an enemy with modern fighters. The Stuka was a magnificent dive bomber. Accurate, deadly, terrifying. But against capable opposition, it was a death trap. Let me tell you what it was really like to fly a Stuka in combat. First, understand what made the Stuka special. The Junkers Ju-87 was designed in the mid-1930s specifically as a dive bomber, not a level bomber that could also dive. A dedicated dive bomber. Everything about it was optimized for one mission. Dive at a steep angle, release bombs with precision, pull up safely. And it did this better than any aircraft in the world. The design included several innovations. Automatic dive brakes under both wings that deployed when you entered the dive, keeping your speed to about 350 miles per hour. This gave you time to aim, a specialized autopilot system that automatically pulled the aircraft out of the dive when you released the bomb. This was critical because dive bombing exerted 5 to 6 times the force of gravity on the pilot. Blood would drain from your brain. Your vision would gray out. Sometimes you would lose consciousness entirely. Without the autopilot, you would keep diving straight into the ground. The Stuka could perform a true vertical dive, 80 to 90 degrees. Most dive bombers could only manage 60 or 70 degrees before exceeding their maximum speed and breaking apart. But the Stuka's dive brakes and sturdy construction allowed it to dive almost straight down. This gave it unprecedented accuracy. A skilled Stuka pilot could place a 500-kilogram bomb within 10 meters of a target from 5,000 feet. No other bomber in the world could match that precision. The aircraft also had psychological weapons. Ram air sirens mounted on the landing gear legs. The Germans called them Jericho trumpets. When you dived, the wind spinning these sirens created a rising, wailing scream, like an over-revving engine, like the sound of impending death. It terrorized troops on the ground, made them panic, made them run. The sound was so effective that it became a propaganda symbol. But it also slowed the aircraft by 5 to 10 miles per hour. So many units eventually removed the sirens. The terror effect was not worth the reduced performance. Inside the Stuka, you sat in a greenhouse canopy with excellent visibility. You could see everything: the target below, the enemy fighters above, the ground rushing up during the dive. This was both good and bad. Good because you could spot threats. Bad because you could see exactly how vulnerable you were. Behind you sat the radio operator and rear gunner. His job was to defend the aircraft from fighters attacking from behind. He had a single machine gun, 7.9 millimeters, later in the war upgraded to a twin-barrel 13 millimeter. But against modern fighters with cannon and multiple machine guns, his defensive fire was almost useless. He could maybe discourage an attack, occasionally score a lucky hit, but mostly he just watched enemy fighters line up their shots and hoped they missed. The Stuka carried either one large bomb under the fuselage, 500 or 1,000 kilograms, plus smaller bombs under the wings. When you released the bomb, a hinged arm swung it clear of the propeller before dropping it. This prevented the bomb from striking the aircraft, a simple but critical feature. Without it, diving bomb runs would be suicidal. In the early campaigns, Poland, France, the Low Countries, the Stuka was devastatingly effective. The Luftwaffe had air superiority. German fighters controlled the skies. Polish and French fighters were outnumbered, outmatched. This meant Stukas could operate with relative safety. They would form up, fly to the target, dive, drop their bombs with incredible accuracy, pull up, return to base. Casualties were low, success rates were high. But everything changed over Britain. The Battle of Britain began in July 1940. The Luftwaffe's mission was to achieve air superiority over southern England so Germany could launch an invasion. Destroy RAF Fighter Command. Knock out the radar stations. Bomb the airfields. Force Britain to surrender or be invaded. Stukas were part of this plan. They would precision bomb the radar stations and airfields that level bombers could not hit reliably. On August 4, 1940, 33 Stukas attacked convoy targets near Portland and naval facilities. British fighters were not launched in time. The Stukas completed their mission without losses. On August 8th, Stukas attacked shipping in the Channel and scored hits without significant casualties. Early signs were promising. The Stuka seemed to be working. But the RAF was learning. Radar gave advance warning of German formations. Ground observers tracked them. Fighter controllers vectored Spitfires and Hurricanes to intercept. And British pilots quickly learned that Stukas were easy prey. On August 13th, operations increased. Stukas attacked airfields and radar stations. Some missions succeeded, but losses started mounting. On August 15th, attacks on radar stations and airfields resulted in mixed success. Some Stukas got through without losses. Others were intercepted. Several were shot down. The pattern was becoming clear. When Stukas encountered determined fighter opposition, they suffered. August 16th was worse. A large formation of Stukas from Stukageschwader 1 and 2 attacked RAF Tangmere Airfield. The attack was devastating. Hangars destroyed. Aircraft burned on the ground. Infrastructure wrecked. 12 personnel killed. A successful mission by any measure, but the cost was horrific. RAF Hurricanes and Spitfires intercepted. The British pilots claimed 17 Stukas destroyed. German records confirm 9 losses, 9 Stukas, out of perhaps 30 involved in the raid. A loss rate of 30% in a single mission. Think about that for a moment. If you flew a Stuka on that mission, you had a 1 in 3 chance of not coming home. 1 in 3. And this was with fighter escort. German Messerschmitt 109s were supposed to protect the Stukas, but they could not. The British fighters were too numerous, too aggressive, too well coordinated. 2 days later, August 18th, came the worst day. 109 Stukas launched a coordinated attack against targets on the south coast. Ford Naval Station, Poling Radar Station, Gosport, Thorney Island, the largest Stuka attack ever attempted. And it was a disaster. British fighters tore into the formations. 17 Stukas from Stukageschwader, 77 were shot down. Others were damaged. Pilots and gunners were killed or wounded. The survivors limped home with bullet holes and dead crewmen. Between August 12th and 18th, the Luftwaffe lost 41 Stukas. 41 in 1 week. At the start of the Battle of Britain on August 1st, Germany had 327 Stukas available, with 261 serviceable. By August 18th, the force was shattered. Production could not replace losses. Experienced crews were dead or wounded. Morale was collapsing. On August 19th, Hermann Göring held a conference. The decision was made. Withdraw the Stukas. The losses were unsustainable. 20% of the entire Stuka force destroyed in 10 days. The aircraft could not survive in contested airspace against modern fighters. The Stuka would never again be deployed in large numbers over Britain. Why were the losses so catastrophic? Because of the dive itself. When you dive-bombed, you committed to a predictable flight path. You rolled into the dive, pointed the nose down, extended the dive brakes, and for the next 6 to 8 seconds, you flew in a straight line at a constant speed toward the ground. You could not maneuver, could not evade. The entire aircraft shook and rattled. The wind howled. The sirens screamed. You focused on the target, lining it up in your sights. At 1,500 feet, you released the bomb. The autopilot kicked in, pulled you up, hard. The G-forces crushed you into your seat. Your vision grayed, maybe blacked out. And then you were climbing again, away from the target, hopefully still alive. But during those 6 to 8 seconds of the dive, you were defenseless. British fighter pilots learned this quickly. They learned to ignore the German escort fighters at high altitude and dive down to attack the Stukas during their bombing runs. By the time the German fighters reacted, it was too late. The Stukas were already under attack. A Spitfire or Hurricane could dive faster than a Stuka, much faster. They would position themselves above and behind the Stuka formation, wait for the Stukas to start their dive, then follow them down. By trading altitude for speed, the British fighters could catch up easily, and once they caught up, the Stuka was a sitting duck. The Stuka's maximum speed was only 210 miles per hour in level flight. During the dive controlled by the brakes, about 350. A Spitfire could reach 370 miles per hour in level flight and over 400 in a dive. The Hurricane was similarly fast. This meant British fighters could close the distance quickly, get into firing position, and open fire. And the Stuka had almost no defensive capability against an attack from below or the sides. The rear gunner could only fire backward. The pilot had no forward-firing guns except in later variants. If a fighter attacked from the front quarter or the side during the dive, there was nothing the Stuka crew could do. Just sit there and hope the bullets missed. The casualties were not just aircraft, they were men, young men. Pilots in their early 20s, gunners even younger. When a Stuka was hit during a dive, the results were usually catastrophic. If the engine was hit, the aircraft might catch fire. If the fuel tank was punctured, flames would engulf the cockpit. If the controls were damaged, the dive would continue all the way to the ground. The autopilot might try to pull up, but if the elevator cables were cut, it could not. The aircraft would simply impact at 350 miles per hour. Some crews managed to bail out. If you were hit but still had control, you could pull up, gain some altitude, and jump. But bailing out of a damaged diving Stuka was not easy. The canopy had to be jettisoned. The pilot had to unbuckle, climb out, and jump clear. All while the aircraft was potentially on fire, spinning, or breaking apart. Many pilots did not make it out. Their bodies were found in the wreckage, still strapped into their seats. Others bailed out successfully, but were killed anyway. One Stuka pilot on August 16th pulled up after being hit, gained some altitude, and jumped. While descending in his parachute, a British Home Guard soldier on the ground mistook him for an enemy parachutist landing to attack. The soldier shot him. The pilot survived, but was wounded in the leg. This was Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson, actually a British Hurricane pilot who had been shot down and was descending in his own parachute. Mistakes happened in the chaos of combat. But for German Stuka crews, even successfully bailing out did not guarantee survival. The psychological impact on surviving Stuka crews was severe. You would take off on a mission knowing that 1 in 3 aircraft might not return. Knowing that if you were intercepted during your dive, you were probably going to die. Knowing that your rear gunner, your friend, the man sitting behind you, might be killed by cannon fire before you even released your bomb. This kind of stress breaks men. Some Stuka pilots refused to fly. Others completed their missions but were shaking, vomiting, unable to function afterward. A few broke down completely. After the withdrawal from the Battle of Britain, the Stuka continued to serve. On the Eastern Front, where the Luftwaffe initially had air superiority, Stukas were effective again. Against Soviet forces in the early stages of Operation Barbarossa, they destroyed tanks, bombed supply columns, supported ground troops. The tank-busting Ju-87G variant, introduced in 1943, was armed with two 37mm cannons under the wings. This version could destroy Soviet tanks by attacking from above, penetrating the thin top armor. Hans Ulrich Rudel, the most decorated German pilot of the war, flew Stukas exclusively. He claimed to have destroyed 519 tanks, sunk the battleship Murat, and shot down 52 aircraft, mostly while flying Stukas. He survived the war despite being shot down multiple times and losing a leg. His achievements were extraordinary, but he was the exception. Most Stuka pilots were not aces. Most were ordinary young men doing a dangerous job, and most did not survive the war. By 1944, the Stuka was obsolete, replaced by faster, more survivable fighter bombers like the Focke-Wulf 190. These aircraft could carry bombs, attack ground targets, and defend themselves against enemy fighters. They did not have the Stuka's precision, but they could survive in contested airspace. The Stuka could not. By May 1945, only 100 operational Stukas remained out of 6,000 built. They continued flying ground attack missions on the Eastern Front until the very end, scoring occasional successes, but mostly just dying. This was the reality for Stuka pilots. In the early war, when Germany had air superiority, they were heroes, precision bombers, the tip of the spear. But when they faced an enemy with capable fighters, modern radar, and effective ground control, they became victims. The 2-week life expectancy was not a myth. It was a statistical reality. During the height of the Battle of Britain, if you were a Stuka pilot flying combat missions, your chances of surviving 2 weeks were slim. Of the approximately 5,700 Stukas built during the war, most were lost, many to enemy fire, others to accidents, mechanical failures, or being destroyed on the ground. And with each lost aircraft went the crew, pilot and gunner, 2 young men, 2 families back in Germany who would receive telegrams, missing in action or killed in action, 2 more casualties in a war that killed millions. The Stuka earned its reputation in the early campaigns. Poland, France, Norway, Yugoslavia. In those battles, it was devastating, accurate, terrifying, a weapon that changed the battlefield. But that reputation did not survive contact with a modern, well-coordinated air defense system. Over Britain, the Stuka was revealed for what it really was: a slow, vulnerable dive bomber that could not survive against determined fighter opposition. The men who flew them were brave. They climbed into those aircraft knowing the risks. Knowing they might not come back, they did their duty, followed their orders, flew their missions. Some became heroes, most became statistics. And we should remember them not as faceless enemies, but as human beings. Young men who flew an obsolete aircraft into impossible situations and paid the price. The Stuka has 2 surviving examples in museums today. One at the Royal Air Force Museum in London, another at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Both are ground attack variants recovered and restored after the war. No flying examples remain. The last Stuka flew in combat in May 1945. After that, the type was scrapped, forgotten, replaced by jets and modern bombers. But for the men who flew them, the memory lasted forever. The screaming dive, the G-forces, the tracers arcing past your canopy. The knowledge that at any moment, enemy fighters might appear and there would be nothing you could do. That was the reality of flying a Stuka in combat. Not the propaganda films, not the newsreels showing successful attacks on defenseless targets. The real experience, the terror, the helplessness, the knowledge that your survival depended on luck as much as skill. This is why Stuka pilots in contested airspace had a 2-week life expectancy. Not because they were poorly trained, not because the aircraft was badly designed, but because the fundamental concept of dive bombing required you to make yourself a slow, predictable target for 6 to 8 critical seconds. And against modern fighters, those 6 to 8 seconds were enough to get you killed. Again and again, until the Luftwaffe finally admitted defeat and pulled the Stukas out of the battle. The Battle of Britain proved that air superiority mattered more than any individual weapons system, that no bomber, no matter how accurate or well-designed, could survive in contested airspace without fighter protection. And that sometimes the most feared weapon in your arsenal becomes a liability when the enemy learns how to counter it. The Stuka pilots of August 1940 learned this lesson the hard way. 20% casualties in 10 days, aircraft burning, crews dying, all for targets that could have been hit by other means with lower losses. Their sacrifice achieved little strategically, but it taught the Luftwaffe a lesson that shaped the rest of the war. Do not send slow, vulnerable aircraft into contested airspace. Do not ask crews to fly obsolete machines against modern defenses. And do not assume that terror weapons remain effective when the enemy stops being terrified and starts fighting back. The 2-week life expectancy was real. The casualties were real. The fear was real. And for the Stuka pilots who lived through it, the memories lasted a lifetime. The lucky ones went home after the war, tried to forget, tried to rebuild their lives. But the sound of that diving scream, the sight of tracers flashing past, the knowledge that any moment could be your last, those things never truly faded. They carried those memories forever. A reminder of what it cost to fly the most feared aircraft of the early war into battle against an enemy that refused to surrender.